Today we're diving into a crime that was so audacious, so brilliantly planned, it was supposed to be the perfect heist. But, as we're about to find out, even the most perfect plans can go spectacularly wrong. This is the story of the Great Train Robbery.
So, let's start with the big question, right? How on earth do you rob a moving train without firing a single shot? See, this wasn't some brutish smash and grab. It was a crime of pure intellect, a kind of ballet of criminal precision that relied on nerve and inside knowledge, not firepower. So really, how did they do it? Just look at this timeline. It's almost hard to believe. In less time than it takes to watch an episode of your favorite show, a 15-man gang stopped a Royal Mail train, took care of the crew, and just vanished into the night with an absolute fortune. The execution? Flawless. It was a masterclass.
Now, an operation this smooth, this precise, it doesn't just happen. It needs a director, right? An architect. And it's time to meet the man who literally called this heist his Sixteen Chapel.
Bruce Reynolds was not your typical gangster. He was a total paradox. Here's a guy from a tough background who saw himself as a gentleman thief. He even called his time in prison his university, where he learned his craft. He drove an Aston Martin, he read Nietzsche, he planned his crimes like a general going to war. For him, this robbery wasn't just about the money. No, this was about creating a legacy.
So, you might be wondering why this train on this particular night? Well, the answer is almost laughably simple: a bank holiday. You see, a long weekend in Scotland meant that cash shipments from the banks were just piling up, and an inside source knew this train wasn't just carrying a bit of cash, it was carrying a once-in-a-lifetime payday. On any normal night, this mail train would be carrying something like 300,000 pounds. A pretty good score for sure, but not exactly the stuff of legend.
But on this night, that number just exploded. We're talking an incredible 2.6 million pounds. All thanks to that bank holiday, this mail train had become a rolling vault. For a guy like Reynolds, that temptation was just impossible to ignore.
The gang's focus was laser sharp, zeroed in on a single carriage, the HVP, or High Value Package Coach. And here is the critical mistake that made the whole thing possible. These coaches were supposed to have alarms, barred windows, the works. But the one in service that night, an older model without any of them. It was basically an armored truck with the door left unlocked.
So the target is set, the massive prize is confirmed. It was time. Time to put Reynolds' masterpiece into motion. Let's get into how the whole plan actually went down.
The plan itself was just brilliant in its simplicity. It was a two-step move. First, they'd rig the trackside signals to show red, forcing the train to stop in the middle of nowhere. Then they'd uncouple the engine and that precious HVP coach, drive it a short way down the track to a bridge where their getaway trucks were waiting, and poof, disappear.
But you know what they say about the best laid plans? The gang had hired a retired train driver to move the engine for them. The only problem? He was an old-school guy, an expert on steam trans. When he was faced with a modern diesel-electric locomotive, he was totally baffled. He couldn't work the controls. They had the train, but they couldn't actually drive it.
So in this moment of just pure chaos, they had to improvise. They ended up forcing the train's actual driver, a guy named Jack Mills, who they'd already hit over the head, to move the train for them. The heist was back on, but that chaotic moment, that was a sign of things to come. The perfect crime was already starting to come apart at the seams.
Back at their hideout, a remote little place called Leatherslade Farm, the gang counted their loot. And the total was even more than they dreamed of: 2.6 million pounds. To put that in perspective, that's worth over 70 million pounds today. They had actually done it. They were unbelievably rich. But that celebration, it wasn't going to last long, because the very place that was meant to keep them safe, Leatherslade Farm, would end up being their undoing. It was the single biggest mistake they made, and it was the key that would blow the whole case wide open.
And this, right here, is where the genius plan just started to collapse under the weight of simple, stupid mistakes. One of the guys casually told the train staff not to move for 30 minutes, which accidentally gave the police a perfect 30-mile search radius for their hideout. Then, spooked by planes flying overhead, the whole gang panicked and fled the farm early, leaving behind half-painted trucks and, most famously of all, a Monopoly board they've been playing on using the real stolen money.
I mean, their sloppiness was just astonishing. In their rush to get out, this gang that had planned everything else down to the second completely forgot to wipe the place down. The police walked into a forensic gold mine. 311 fingerprints. They were everywhere, on the Monopoly board, on tabletops, even on a bottle of ketchup.
So, armed with this absolute treasure trove of evidence, the case was handed over to London's elite robbery unit, the Flying Squad, and its famously relentless leader. Detective Chief Superintendent Tommy Butler was the total opposite of Bruce Reynolds. If Reynolds was flashy, Butler was obsessive. He was this quiet, incredibly determined investigator who basically lived for the job. For him, catching the Great Train Robbers wasn't just another case. It became his personal mission. Even as the police started making arrests, the gang was just dripping with arrogance. This quote from one of the robbers, Charlie Wilson, pretty much sums it up. They were absolutely convinced that without the stolen cash as evidence, the police had nothing. They could not have been more wrong. For Tommy Butler, those fingerprints were all the proof he would ever need. Now, while most of the gang was rounded up pretty quickly and given massive 30-year sentences, a few key players, including the mastermind himself, slipped right through the net. And this kicked off some of the most famous international manhunts of the entire 20th century.
Bruce Reynolds, the mastermind, he lived this lavish life on the run in Mexico and France, just burning through his share of the cash. But after 5 years, the money ran out. Broke, no more options, he quietly slipped back into England, only to be cornered by Tommy Butler himself. Butler's greeting was just chillingly simple. "Hello, Bruce. It's been a long time." And Reynolds' cool reply? "C'est la vie."
But the most infamous fugitive of them all had to be Ronnie Biggs. He wasn't even one of the planners, just a small-time crook who got a big score. But his daring escape from prison and his incredible 30-year life on the run turned him into this bizarre folk hero. He became a media celebrity in Brazil, taunting the British police. He even recorded a song with the Sex Pistols, before finally, voluntarily, returning to the UK in 2001 to face the music.
Okay, so after all that, the arrests, the long prison sentences, the globe-trotting manhunts, what was the final score? How much of that stolen money did the police actually get back?
Well, the numbers here are just staggering. Of the £2.6 million stolen, police only ever recovered a tiny, tiny fraction, less than £350,000. The rest of the money from the Great Train Robbery? It just vanished. Spent on the run, laundered away, never to be seen again.
And that leaves us with the central question of this whole story, doesn't it? The planning was brilliant, the haul was record-breaking, and most of the money was never, ever found. And yet, almost every single person involved was eventually caught, all because of a few sloppy, almost amateurish mistakes. So what do you think? Was it the perfect crime undone by human error, or was it just a spectacular failure from the very beginning?